10. The Hinge of Memory. They turned and swam back in silence through the cave. In part, this was due to a sense of having intruded on something private and personal. In part, to shock. Marty's thoughts seemed to circle round in his head. He tried to find some other explanation for what he had seen, but could not. At last they climbed, dripping, out of the lake and sat on the grass. The tree was a lot higher, he noticed. Branches came out from it on the lakeside only at convenient intervals. Already you could see they were going to be broad and flat, making excellent diving boards. Probably springy too, Marty thought. The plant god looked after its creatures. He said, "I wonder how long he's been like that." "They're good. I don't know. Years probably. Decades maybe." "And us?" "What do you mean?" Marty said, "How long before we start kneeling down and praying to it?" "That's silly." "Is it?" "There's probably something wrong with him. With his mind." That's what they thought at first station. They were wrong. He was sane enough, after being 70 years in the caves. "All right," Marty said, "and after we've been 70 years in them." "We'll find a way out long before then." He didn't. Steve was silent and then said, "Perhaps he didn't try hard enough." Marty was on the point of saying that if he did not, it was probably because the plant found a means of stopping him, when he remembered what Thurgood had said about the plant knowing everything that went on in the caves. It could be listening to them, and it understood human speech. The time to talk was when the light went out and the outer parts of the plant slept. He tried to remember what they had just said. Nothing, he thought, that counted. The plant would also know that they had swam out and seen Thurgood on the island, and would expect them to have a reaction to that. It would expect them to be shocked, even rebellious. What mattered was not revealing to it any plan of action they might work out. He said, "I suppose that it could be it. You're right. We'll find something." Steve was apparently content. They lay on the grass for a while, drying off. Then Marty suggested another trip of exploration into the other caves, and Steve agreed. There was always a chance, Marty thought, that they would see something that would give them a clue to escaping, though it was a slim one. He had another motive as well. After they had explored a couple more caves, each with its quota of plant things, he led the way up to the crawler. The moss was beginning to grow up over the tracks, but not yet got very far. Marty went inside and came out with a torch. He said, in case the plant were listening, "Might as well have our own night lights since none's provided." The day passed in idling, swimming, eating. Thurgood was back by the lake when they returned. He said nothing about the plant or the island. He would scarcely have noticed them, with all his attention concentrated on his praying. But Marty supposed the plant might have told him of their being there. He clearly did not want to talk, and because of that, Marty pressed him. When would they be called back to the island? Thurgood said, "The plant will decide." "Does it have to decide everything?" Thurgood looked at him blankly. "Well, does it?" "You will learn." "Learn what?" Marty asked. "Why the plant thinks it can tell us what to do and when to do it?" Thurgood's blue eyes stared from his white face. Marty had thought he might be provoked into resentment or anger at what he would regard as impudence, maybe as sacrilege. But his reaction did not seem to be at all like that. It was more like someone in the wisdom of age listening with quiet, infinitely tolerant contempt to the foolishness of the very young. He reminded himself that Thurgood was very old, 100 years old, yet with a shiver of fear he realized that the impression was of something much more ancient than 100 years. He seemed as though the plant itself looked through his eyes. Then night fell and Thurgood crumpled into sleep. Marty said, "Steve, listen." "I'm listening." He yawned loudly. "I'm dog-tired." "Stay awake," Marty said urgently. "We've got to talk." "What about?" "I was saying last night, but you've gone to sleep, that this is the only safe time to talk without the plant hearing us, to find a way of escaping." "Oh, we'll find something. We've only been here a few days." "Look," Marty said, "when we were talking about Thurgood after we swam back from the island, you said that perhaps he didn't try hard enough. But why didn't he? He wasn't a man who gave up easily. Look at the way he stuck to the business of finding the flower." "Oh, perhaps he didn't want to try. Perhaps he liked it here from the start." "Don't you?" "What do you mean?" "The plant," Marty said. "It's complete in itself. It doesn't need anything from the outside. When Thurgood came in, it was like a grain of sand getting into an oyster. It would be an irritant if it couldn't be neutralized, absorbed somehow. Well, he has been absorbed. Or his mind has. And now there are 2 more grains of sand to be treated the same way. The plant is probably getting at us already. In fact, I'm sure it is. Thurgood goes to sleep as soon as the light dims. We don't quite do that, but we feel tired. It's part of the same thing." "How is it getting at us? It didn't summon us to the island at all today." "Perhaps that's important. These fruits, the water from the drinking fountain tree, maybe the air we breathe, they could all be changing us. Remember the lotus eaters in the Odyssey? They ate this fruit which made them happy and made them forget where they were or where they had come from. Isn't that what we're doing? Don't you find that the bubble, that everything before the caves is beginning to seem less real?" "Oh, in a lot of ways this is better than the bubble. No one to tell us to do things, no school. Everything we want given us." Steve, Marty remembered, had been an orphan and a loner. There was no one he desperately wanted to see again, but even in himself, he could feel the beginning of a change. He could remember his mother clearly, but his father had become a vague and distant figure. "Everything given us so far," Marty said, "but in the end, we won't want anything except to be fed and go to the island every day and pray. Thurgood told us he had a swimming place once. It went because he no longer wanted it. No longer wanted anything except to pray to the plant." Steve was silent, then said, "I don't see a lot of harm in him doing that." "Don't you? When I was talking to him just now, he wasn't really there at all. It was the plant I was talking to. A lot of the time, he's part of the plant. At least his mind is, which is what matters. Do you want your mind to be taken over like that, so that you only think and want what the plant thinks and wants?" "It's not all the time. And he's been 70 years in the caves." "So the process is not complete yet. The plant is in no hurry. Time doesn't exist here. Thurgood said that. It could be 1,000 years before he belongs to the plant utterly, or 10,000. "Well," Steve said, "what's the rush? After 500 years, maybe we'll need to start worrying." He was angry with Steve's obtuseness, but knew he had to tread carefully, to be very, very patient. Steve had no family of his own, that he missed and wanted to get back to. It was just one difference between them, but it could be a big one. In a weird way, the thought of the plant's protectiveness could be a special attraction to him, almost as though the plant itself could represent the family he had never had. Marty said, "In every process, there's a point of no return, like when the crawler was sliding down that slope. Nothing could stop us crashing once the slide had started. If we give in now, the plant has got us. Bit by bit, we'll stop being individuals, stop having minds and wills of our own." Steve was silent again. Marty did not know how far he was getting over to him. He pressed on. "Think about that. It's worse than that character in that book you were writing. He was chained up to a wall, but he could still think for himself. There was something to hope for, the possibility of getting free someday. Our bodies wouldn't be chained up, but our minds would be. And there would be nothing to hope for, because he wouldn't even want to be free. Remember the balloons? Getting punished was a proof that we were free to do what we liked. The plant would never punish us. It would never need to." For several moments, Steve's silence continued. Marty was racking his brain for further arguments when Steve said, "You think the fruit is dangerous? That it can make us change?" "I think it's part of it. Perhaps the most important part. We could stop eating, live on the crawler rations, only won't that make the plant suspicious? We'd better eat some, but limit it as much as possible." That was an overwhelming relief in realizing that Steve was on his side still, that they could talk about things and make plans. "We could go to the crawler at night and fill up." In a discouraged voice, Steve said, "The supplies won't last very long. Not 70 days. Never mind 70 years. We don't have 70 years. In fact, if we're still here in 70 days, we're finished. We need to do something fast to have any hope at all." "Do what? Is there any hope anyway?" There was another hazard, Marty realized. One could appreciate the horrifying menace of the plant, and even so despair of overcoming it. He put all the confidence he could muster into his voice. "There's one chance. When we first met Thurgood, and he was telling us how the plant got here and the way it worked, he said something which might help." "What?" "He said there were other places beside the one we fell through where the rock cover is not complete. 3 or 4, he said. Saying that meant he knew where they were. If one of them were in the right position and big enough for the crawler to break through." "Small chance." "Better than none." "Anyway, he wouldn't tell us. You said yourself, he worships the plant. He won't do anything, or tell us anything, that would be against the plant's wishes." "He won't unless we can change him." "How are we going to do that? Feed him canned battery chicken roll and hope it cancels out the lotus fruits?" "He was human once. Part of him still is, underneath. If we can make him remember." "He's not interested," Steve said. "He doesn't want to talk about anything except the plant. He knows all his own people are dead long ago and he doesn't care about any others. When you mention the bubble or Earth, he doesn't want to know." "We've got to keep at him, keep prodding away." "But if he's gone past the point of no return, as you said, like a crawler sliding..." "No return when you're on your own is not the same as no return when you've got help. If there had been a couple of other crawlers standing by and they'd been able to throw us anchors, we might have made it. And yet he's not been taken over completely. If he's worshipping the plant, that must mean that part of him is still separate from it. You can't worship yourself. Okay, Steve said. We'll try. He sounded a bit more cheerful. But even if we do get anywhere with him, we can't make plans except at night, and when night falls he flops out. If we can get him interested, he might not. Steve yawned. I'm really beat. There's nothing we can do now, is there? We could go up to the crawler and get some food. I'm not hungry. So we wouldn't be too hungry tomorrow, I meant. You go if you like. I don't think I could face ham and eggs roll. I'm too tired. Marty was tired too. They were getting some exercise, of course, with swimming, but he felt it was not really, or not entirely, a physical tiredness. He fought it for a while, and then drifted into sleep. The plant said, "We understand your request and grant it." The boys were on the island again, having been told by Thurgood that they were wanted. They stood in front of this brightness which seemed to have other pulsing brightnesses inside it that Marty had not noticed before. There was the same feeling of peace and benevolence, except that if anything, it was stronger, surer, more all-surrounding. Notions of escape, of leaving the caves, was far off, small, unimportant. The plant was good, and he felt a bursting joy at the thought that it wanted to share its goodness with them. Steve had asked for the trailing vines on which they could swing out over the lake. The swimming place was nearly complete, with its firm, leafy ledge running all round. You could sit on it, dangling your legs, or run along it and dive in, and the tree was over 5 meters high, its jutting flat branches almost strong enough to bear them. He wanted to thank the plant, but words seemed inadequate. The plant was so wise and great, they so puny and unimportant. The plant spoke to them of itself, of its own nature. Its existence was a cycle, continually self-renewing. In the caves it created forms and patterns that changed, never repeating themselves. The plant watched its creation and delighted in it. The other part of the cycle was meditation. In this it withdrew into the inner self. Creation slept while mind concentrated at its deepest and most profound, withdrawn from externals and appendages and absorbed in its own glory and wonder. All things were at harmony in the plant. Sound had been unknown before Thurgood came. The caves had lived and flowered in eternal silence. From him the plant had learned music, and out of the simple primitive chords which he had provided it had fashioned complex glories. They too, in their small way, might contribute to this world, this universe of joy and peace. The spell lasted for some time after the raft took them away from the island. They sat on the grass, still dazed and overwhelmed. Thurgood had taken the raft and gone off across the lake. Marty found himself envying his freedom to go to the plant, rather than wait to be called. There was something gnawing at the back of his mind, something he had meant to do, a plan of action of some kind, but it could not be important. All that mattered was lying here in the warm scented air. The tree was still growing, and looking at the wall of the cave, he could see that a vine-like plant had started climbing up from the base towards the roof. The orchestra tree was playing Strauss again, presumably when they had the sort of rapport with the plant that Thurgood had, they would get the kind of music they wanted. It was pleasant enough even so. Everything was pleasant because the plant wanted them to be happy. He did not jerk out of this mood until Steve said something about going up to the orchard. Then he remembered what they had decided the previous night, to eat as little of the fruit as possible. He said, "I'm not hungry just yet," and saw Steve remember also. They went for a swim instead, and he thought of the rest of the plan. It must wait until Thurgood returned. He scanned the lake impatiently for the returning raft. The thought of the fruit would not go out of his head. Now that the suggestion had been made, he did feel hungry. Really hungry. They would have been wiser, he realized, to have eaten food from the crawler during the night, despite the effort involved in getting it. He was glad that Steve was with him in this. It made it that little bit clearer. His hunger increased as the minutes went by. It was different from any hunger he had known before, sharper and more avid. He was tantalized by the recollection of how delicious the fruits were, of their taste, their ripe juiciness. The one advantage the hunger gave was that it cleared his mind of the fog of well-being. He realized that the plant's influence on their minds was spreading and strengthening. Time was not on their side. If they were to escape, they must make the attempt soon. At last Thurgood came back. They went to him and talked. He was even more taciturn than usual. Probably, Marty thought, because he had just returned from communion with the plant. The questions they put about his life before the caves were ignored, or answered laconically and unsatisfactorily. "I don't recall. I forget. Maybe it was like that, I don't know." Steve dropped out, shrugging his shoulders at the impossibility of getting anywhere. But they had to keep on, Marty thought. They had to find where the plant's weaknesses were. And only Thurgood could help them. He continued, ignoring the silences and brusque responses. A normal man would have got irritated by his presence, but Thurgood was not normal. There was no place for irritability in a mind dominated by the bland, euphoric calm which the plant inspired. In the end, he gave up questions as such, but kept on talking, and talking about Earth. He talked about TV programs he had seen, ran through the plots of movie after movie. At one time, found himself giving a resume of a geography lesson on Malaysia. Thurgood lay on the grass, his eyes closed. Marty was not sure whether he was listening, whether he was awake even. Steve returned and made an effort at contributing, but soon gave it up again. Marty persisted. He was bored himself, desperately bored, and embarrassed by this monologue which he had to keep going without the least encouragement. Then a small spark ignited. Marty had been talking about his parents, about his mother who as a girl had travelled all over the planet with her artist father. He said, as a casual afterword to this, "My father never moved out of one small town until he went to college. He was a New Englander, New Hampshire." The first bit was something he had gleaned from his mother during their talks following the balloon episode. His father, except that one time at the reservoir, had never mentioned his past. Thurgood opened his eyes. He said, in a remote voice, "New Hampshire. I'm from Vermont." Marty said quickly, "What part?" Thurgood did not reply. "Were you born there?" he asked. "Did you go to school in Vermont? What was it like?" There was no answer. It looked as though it had been merely a flicker of memory. No sooner aroused than quenched. Still, he kept on, doggedly pounding away at it. He racked his mind for anything that would provide a talking point, recklessly inventing where he could not recall. He thought he was going to talk himself hoarse. His throat felt dry and the idea of an orange from the trees just up the slope was torture. But he went on, and at last, very slowly, the monologue ceased to be entirely that. Thurgood was beginning to talk as well. Steve lent a hand then, taking some of the load off him. He had thought Steve, with his imagination, would be good at this, but in fact, he faltered more than Marty had done, and it was necessary to go on helping out. They prodded Thurgood into talking of anything and everything, but they found that it was his childhood that gave the best response. He had been born on a farm in hill country, with the fields that fitted into the lie of an old, long-inhabited land. It had been chiefly dairy farming. They had a herd of Friesians, and he remembered a tale his grandmother had told him about two of the cows, that they had been so fond of her father, his great-grandfather, that they had swum all the way from Holland when he emigrated to America. He could not have been older than 4 or 5, and he had believed it to be true and had stared in awe at the cows, imagining their huge black and white bodies battling with the waves all the way across the vast, storm-tossed ocean. "She used to make wonderful cookies," Thurgood said, "with blobs of chocolate all the way through, and she gave me buttermilk to drink with them, pouring it out of a big blue and white jug. She said buttermilk was the best thing you could drink." He paused. Marty was thinking of something to keep him going when he went on. "I'm getting hungry. Who's coming up to the orchard?" It was essential to keep him in this mood of companionship. They must go with him and try to eat as little as possible. Marty was hungry too, ravenously so. He took a banana, slowly peeled it, and still more slowly started to eat. It was torture. The taste seemed even better than before, and he had to fight the impulse to gobble it down. He kept close to Thurgood, but not so close that the man would notice he was scarcely eating anything. They wandered through the orchard. Steve had been following the same technique, but Marty saw him eat an apple and then pull up one of the turnip cheeses and nibble it. He threw him a look of reproach and warning, but Steve appeared not to notice. After they had eaten, they went back to the lake, and Marty continued the campaign against Thurgood. It was less successful than earlier. The fruit could have had something to do with that, but he managed to keep the teeniest link of conversation in being. Then the light faded, and Thurgood, as it did so, dropped into heavy, insensible sleep. Marty said, "I vote the first thing we do is go up to the crawler and get something to eat. I'm starving." "There's plenty of time," Steve said. "I want to rest." "If we rest, we may go to sleep and not wake up till it's light again. We'd better go now." Steve said, "It's a bit pointless anyway." "What is?" "Trying to get information out of Thurgood. He's been talking quite a lot." "About the earth, not about the plant." "He's remembering he's human. That's what matters." Steve said, "Look, if you did get him to a point where he was willing to tell us something, it would have to be at night, wouldn't it? And the moment that darkness comes, bingo, he's out. So what's the good?" "If we had him talking, we might be able to keep him awake." "He was talking tonight, but it didn't help." There was no sense in arguing about it. It was their only hope, and it had to be made to work. Marty said, "Anyway, are you coming up to the crawler?" Steve yawned. "You go if you're hungry." Which meant that Steve was not. He must have eaten more of the fruit than Marty had thought. He felt more despair then than he had done since the initial discovery that they were trapped. Much of this was due to the shock of realizing how much he had been depending on Steve's help. More than that, on his leadership. There had been jealousy and rivalry underlying their friendship from the start. His suggestion of taking the crawler to First Station had been caused by that. At the back of his mind had been the feeling that Steve was cleverer and stronger than he was. Stronger not just physically, but in character. The incident of Steve's insistence of going to look for the flower had borne that out. He had been looking for that strength and determination now, as the factor which could just tip the balance and help them to win through. And it was not there. Obstinacy and willfulness were not strength. In a case like this, the reverse of it. He said, "You won't come, Steve?" "No, I'm too tired." His voice was as final and uncompromising as over the hunt for the flower. Marty knew he was on his own. He said, "Okay, I'll bring you something." Steve did not bother to reply. Or maybe he was already asleep. He went back through the caves, lighting his way with the hand torch. It was an eerie journey. The trees were as still as though frozen. They looked grey and drab. Even the fruits looked grey. The moss on the walls and ceilings where the beam of his torch lighted on it was grey too. Colour and life had been drained together as the plant's consciousness withdrew into itself in its incomprehensible meditation. Marty felt very much alone as he made his way along the tunnel, down the ladder tree and through the arch to the second cave. The tree shapes, which he had only seen threshing in motion, were as fixed as everything else, and as grey, their branches turned into still, lifeless tentacles. He found the rope at the bottom of the slope and hauled himself up it, the torch tucked in his belt and flashing at odd angles as he swung from the rope. He reached the top and headed through the next tunnel to the top cave. The crawler lay beside the curled stem and huge bud of the flower. He went inside, picked the first tin he found in the food locker, opened it and ate ravenously. He thought about Steve. It was important to keep him from slipping any further under the influence of the plant. He must take some ordinary food back and get him to eat it so that he would eat less from the trees tomorrow. But if he took it in a tin, the tin would remain as evidence and the plant would know they were getting food from the crawler. Even if they threw it in the lake, the plant might know of it. One could not set limits to its awareness of the minutest details. They must leave no traces at all, and the only way he could think of doing that was taking the food out of the tin here and carrying it back in his bare hands. It was something which normally would have been stood condemned on many grounds, hygiene not the least, but which answered the prime need. He picked a can whose contents seemed to be the least likely to crumble, opened it, and prized them out in a single roll. The return journey was easier in that he was now more accustomed to the petrified night world of the caves, but had the new problem of the ham soil roll which he had to carry. Getting down the rope was the really tricky part, but he managed it using an arm and a hand. He had to stick the torch back in his belt while he climbed the ladder tree one-handed, but the rest was straightforward. He came down through the orchard. Even the grass was stiff as his feet brushed through, stiff and grey, and found Steve fast asleep where he'd left him. Marty put the torch down and shook him with his free hand. Steve mumbled but stayed asleep. He shook him again, and this time Steve turned over. As he did so, His face came into the beam of light. It was that which woke him. He blinked and sat up. Marty gave him the ham soy roll. He obediently took a bit, made a face, but went on eating it. Marty explained why he had taken it out of the tin. Steve said,
"The taste hasn't improved."
"It doesn't matter about the taste as long as it keeps us from eating too much of the fruit."
"What's the good?" Steve said. "Thurgood will still fall asleep the moment the light goes. There's nothing you can do about that."
The torch lay on its side, throwing a beam of light that took in one branch of the tree by the lakeside. Marty reached out and switched it off to conserve the battery. The idea came to him as he did so. It might work. It just might work. But it was a slim chance. He decided not to mention it to Steve. In his present mood of despondency, he would only pour cold water on the whole thing.